So how does the Anki algorithm works? Let me explain this to you. Anki is basically a flashcard app, and there are three different type of cards. I'm using this deck Anking, and all thanks to the creator. Let's see, there are blue card, red card, and the green card. Blue card are the new cards. According to Anki, these are the cards that you have never seen before. After you see a new card, because a card can remain new only for a one time. After you have seen the card, it's no longer new. It goes through the process of learning. And learning card is denoted by red card. After you have learned the card, it becomes green. That's what a green signifies. It's a learn card. But the red card can be blue turning red or green turning red. That means new card can be learning card or a card that was already learned. You forgot for some reason and now we're in the process of relearning it. So it can still be a red card. So red card means a learning and relearning cards. And there is a difference in the way Anki treats blue card, red card, and the green cards. Even in the red card itself, also blue turning red is treated differently and green turning red is treated differently. So let's see how it works. First, go to the deck options. Here in the settings, go to deck options. Then what happens to your card is determined by what settings you have put. Let's say for new cards, the card was blue, new card, and you pressed space bar, you see the answer. Now what happens is determined by what's in the learning steps. Now the card is no longer blue, it's converted itself from blue to red, so it's in the process of learning. So what happened to that card depends on what's in the learning step. You can make learning process as long as you want, but I've kept it 20 minutes and one day. In your case, maybe it's 1 minute and 10 minutes, which is by default in Anki. What this means is, let's say a new card was shown to me. I did not know the answer. I pressed again. If I press again, the card will be shown to me again in 20 minutes. After showing me the card in 20 minutes, if I still don't know the answer, it will still keep asking me, keep repeating this step until I know the information. If I keep pressing again in the learning steps for the red card, it will keep following the pattern that's here. It will still ask me in 20 minutes. Now asking me after 20 minutes, let's say I know the answer, then I have not learned it yet. It's still in the process of learning because not all learning steps are completed. So if I pressed good, it will ask me again in one day because that's what I have put the settings. Now in the after asking the one day, after one day, let's say I don't remember the answer after one day, I'll press again. If I press again, the learning step will be repeated. It will again ask me in 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, let's say I still don't remember the answer. It will again repeat the process. It will again ask me in 20 minutes. But after asking after 20 minutes, let's say I remember the answer. Then it will again follow the learning steps, ask me in one day. Now after one day, if I still don't remember, it will keep repeating this step until I remember after one day, after at the end of the process. Let's say it asks me after one day, and let's say I now remember the card. Now there is no more learning steps. The card is no longer learning, no longer red. Now card converts into green. Green card is the loan card, and what happened to that loan card is determined by what's in the graduating interval. Now after asking after one day, it will ask me in what's in the graduating interval. Maybe in your case it's one day, in my case I put it 3 days. So after asking after one day, it will ask me in 3 days, and in 3 days it expects me to know the answer because I have already learned the card in there. I've already repeated enough steps and I have already learned the card. So after 3 days, it expects me to know the card. Let's say it asks me question after 3 days, and let's say I didn't remember the card. I pressed again. If I press again, what happens is that the card will turn lapse. That's the process of relearning because I was expected to know because I've already learned those cards, but for some reason I do not remember. So I have to undergo the process of relearning that cards. And what happens to the relearning cards depends on what's in the lapse, what's in the relearning steps. So in my case, the relearning steps is 10 minutes. So in the 3 days, after 3 days, it asks me the question. I do not remember. I go through the process of relearning. It asks me the question again in 10 minutes. If I do not remember the question after asking after 10 minutes, it will again keep repeating these steps. Whatever the steps are here, it will keep repeating those steps. Let's say it asks me question after 10 minutes. And let's say now I know the card. If I know the card, it will ask me in one day again because that's what the minimum interval is. After asking after one day, what I mean to these cards is actually pretty different because it is determined the new interval for the card is determined by one formula, that is new interval equals to current interval into each factor into interval modifier. What is that? For every card in Anki, there is a each factor. By default, the starting ease is 250%, which is 2.5. and the interval modifier is 100% by default, that is 1. So in the formula, current interval into each factor into interval modifier, if you multiply something by 1, that's basically the same number, so we can ignore interval modifier for now if it is 1. But if it changes, like let's keep it 1.5, then we have to consider interval modifier as well. But let's just keep it 1.0 because the algorithm of Anki is tried and tested, so I don't want to mess up with this. So let's keep it 1, and just remember current interval into each factor. So what's each factor? I said there is starting each of 250 for 250% for each card, and if you keep pressing good all the time, the each factor remains 250% all the time. It does not change. But whenever you press hard again or easy, the each factor changes. Let's say you press hard. If you press hard, the each factor decreases by 15%. Each factor decreases by 15% each time you press hard. If you pressed easy, each factor increases by 15%. What I mean is the each factor of a card was 250%. Now you pressed hard. Each factor decreases by 15% and it's now no longer 250%. Now it's minus 15%, which is 235. But let's say there was a each factor of 250% for one card. Now we have pressed easy. After pressing easy, the each factor increases by 15%. Now it becomes 265%. So the current interval will, now the new interval will be current interval into each factor. So each factor, if it increases, your new interval will keep on increasing. If the each factor decreases, your new interval will keep on decreasing because your each factor has decreased. Now let's go to the process. uh, you learn the card, you graduate the card, it asks you in 3 days. Now let's say you pressed good, you remember the informations. So what happens to this card is it will ask you in the new interval. So how is the new interval determined? The new interval equals to current interval, which is 3 days, into each factor, which is 250% or 2.5, which has not changed, and the interval modifier is 1, so you can ignore this for now. So current interval equals to 3 day, and now each factor, that is 250%. So 2.5 into 3, which is 7.5. So it will basically ask me the question again in 7 day or 8 days. That's what the new interval formula is. And again, let's say I was in the process of learning new card. I pressed again, it asked me in 20 minutes. Now after 20 minutes, I remember that card quite well. It's pretty easy for me, and I pressed easy button. Now the interval it is going to ask me, the question is determined by what's in the easy interval. So it will ask me in the 4 days. Maybe it's 4 days in your case as well. So if I press easy, the interval it asks me the question at first will be determined by what's in the easy interval. If it's 5 day, you can change that, you can play with it. If you press 5, then it will ask you in 5 days. But I would like to keep it 4 days because that's what was by default. So I don't want to mess with this. So 4 days. Now after 4 days, the new interval will be defined as current interval into each factor. So let's go through our formula. It first asks you the question, you answered it correctly, you pressed easy. Now it asks you after 4 days. Now after 4 days, what actually happens is that new interval equals to current interval, that is 4 day into each factor. What's the each factor for this card? By default it was 250%, which is 2.5. But since last time you had pressed easy, you the ease bonus, you get the ease percentage, ease factor increases by 15%, which we have already discussed. So now it's no longer 250%, the ease factor is 265% rather. You add 15% to the ease factor, it adds for the lifetime, it will always be 265% now until you press button other than good. So 4 into each factor, which is 265%, that 15% bonus from pressing easy last time. So 4 into 2.65, 265% is somewhere around 2.65 into 4, that maybe somewhere around 10 11. So it will ask you after 10 11 days if you pressed good. But if you pressed easy again, what will be the interval it will be asked? Its each factor was 265%. For pressing easy, you get easy bonus of 130%, that is 1.3. So 265 plus 130, that is 265 plus 130, 395, I guess. So 4 into 3.95, and interval modifier is 1, so we don't need to consider this. So 4 into 3.95, which is let's consider 3.95 is 4. So 4 into 4, 16 days. It will ask you in 16 days if you pressed easy. And the ease factor, you again guess the increase in the ease percentage, that is 265 plus 15% bonus for the lifetime, that is 265 plus 15, which is 200. 80, I guess. So now the ease factor for this card becomes 280% for the lifetime, which is ease factor is 2.8 for the lifetime until you press cards other than good. If you pressed easy, its ease factor keep on increasing. If you pressed let's say hard, its ease percent it decreases by 15%. It was 280%, you pressed hard, it ease percent decreases by 15%. So from 285 it again comes back to 265. Again you pressed hard, let's say is its ease factor again decreases by 15% and it comes back to 250. Now suppose you do not press hard, rather you press again. If you press again, the ease factor decreases by 20%. So from 250% it comes back to 230%, and the formula is same. New interval equals to current interval into each percentage. Each percentage for different card is different. That's why some cards, if you are continuously making mistakes, the ease factor keeps on decreasing, and the highest penalty is for when you press again. If you press hard, it decreases by 15%, ease factor decreases by 15%. If you pressed again, the ease factor decreases by 20% and it undergoes the process of lapses. If you press again, if you press hard, it does not undergo the process of lapses, rather it simply follows the formula. If you press again, it undergoes the process of lapses, and the new formula will be defined by new interval equals to current interval, whatever the interval is, into for pressing again it's lapses. If you press hard, then current interval into hard interval is 1.2. There is no each factor, it's 1.2. It's fixed. Maybe you can mess around it, you can keep 1.3 as well, but it's 1.2 by default, so just keep it. The each factor is 1.2, no matter if it was suppose each factor was 300%. You have been pressing easy for a long time, and the each factor has increased to 300%. If you pressed hard, it doesn't matter what the each percentage was, it doesn't decrease by it does not get something like easy bonus which increases by 130%. It does not increase by 130%, it's rather fixed. It's not a bonus or it's not a penalty, it's 1.2. So even if it was 300%, it does not decrease by 120%, it's 1.2. So it's one of the most immovable aspects of Anki. If you press hard, the each factor is not considered, it will multiply current interval by 1.2, that's fixed. And for the lifetime, it's each into each percentage, each factor decreases by 15%. And let's suppose it was the interval, current interval was 50 days, its each factor was 300%. Now you pressed hard. If you press hard, 50 into 1.2, that's current interval was 15, it does not consider each factor, whatever the each factor was, it does not consider. It will multiply it by hard interval, that is 1.2. So 50 into 1.2, which is somewhere around 60 days. It will again ask you in 60 days if you pressed hard. And the each factor for the lifetime decreases by 15%. That is from 300%, it will come down by 15%, and now it will become 285%. So that's what pressing hard does. So pressing hard decreases the interval by 15%, sorry, is percentage by 15%. Again, decreases your each percentage by 20%, and it keeps those cards in the lapses. If you press easy, it increases, it gives you the easy bonus, and for the lifetime it increases the each percentage by 15%. And that's how new interval, we have to understand the formula. That's new interval equals to current interval into each factor, which is different for different cards, and then the interval modifier. We have the interval modifier, which is by default 1. So let's go and look at some real cards. Okay, let's focus on this card. Toxic megacolon is a medical emergency that requires nasogastric decompression, antibiotics, and IV fluids plus minus if inflammatory body is associated. I've done this card for a pretty long time, and I know the answer is steroids. But you can look at the informations of this card. Press I. If you press I, you can see the number of times I have done this card. Like I've done this for the first time in December 8, and today is January 17. So for the first time I did this card, I pressed again. That's 1 is again and 3 is good. So its ease factor was 250% by default, and it stays 250%. It's in the process of learning. And then I presses good. Then it again asked me in 1 day, which is the learning step. It was 20 minutes in 1 day in my case. So it asked me first, I did not know. I pressed 1, which is again, it asked me 20 minutes. After asking 20 minutes, I pressed good because I remember the answer. Now the next learning step in my process was 1 day. So it asked me in 1 day. Learning process was not completed. And after asking after 1 day, I do not remember the information. So I pressed again, and it asked me again in 20 minutes because that's what I had kept the setting. But the each percentage has not decreased because it's still in the learning process. The ease percentage does not decreases for the learning cards. It only decreases for the cards you have graduated, for the green cards, the card Anki expects you to remember. After asking after 20 minutes, I still do not remember because for some reason I was not remembering this card. I pressed again and it asked me again in 20 minutes. After asking after 20 minutes, I pressed good. Then it asked me in 1 day. After asking after 1 day, I do not remember this again and I pressed again. And look at here, the each percent has not decreased all this time. It again asked me in 20 minutes because my learning steps were 20 minutes and 1 day. After asking after 20 minutes, I remember this. And this I pressed 3, that is good. And then it asked me in 1 day. After asking after 1 day, I still forgot those. I pressed again. It asked me in 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, I still forgot those. I pressed 1 again. Again asked me in 20 minutes. That was in the learning step, 20 minutes in 1 day. It asked me in 20 minutes again. And now after asking after 20 minutes, I remember the informations. I pressed good and then it asked me in 1 day. After asking after 1 day, now I remember the informations and then I remember the information here. Okay, it asked me in 3 days. After asking after 3 days, for some reason I forgot that information again and then I pressed again because I had graduated here. It asked me after 3 days because after 1 day the card become graduated. I was not pressing good after 1 day anywhere here, but here I graduated the card for the first time. It turned green from blue. The card had turned green, and when it had turned green, I pressed one again. One means again. So when I pressed again, the ease interval has decreased by 20%. That is from 250%, the ease percentage has decreased by 20%. So now I'm going to press good for this card. If I pressed good, its ease factor remains 230% because pressing good does not change the ease factor. But if I had pressed easy in that case, its each percentage would have increased from 230% to 245%. It would have increased by 15. So, and the new interval would have been current interval into each factor. So that's how interval would have changed. And that is how it is maintained. And you can mess up with the algorithm, but I suggest not to.